we'd like to welcome everybody here to this workshop on 9/12/18. It's 10 o'clock. We'll start by saying the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Let me just introduce who we have here. We have Commissioner Huxley on my left, myself, Commissioner Gold, Commissioner Commissioner Boyce's empty seat here. I guess he's going to be here late. John Jesuit, our administrative assistant, and John Huddle's up at the stand here. He's going to speak.
Thanks.
So we'll start off. Does anybody have any amendments to the agenda?
I was going to talk about sort of one item.
Do you have an amendment to the agenda?
Well, I would just like to briefly give the board an update on an item, and it's basically county council and county administrator, who gets to sign their paychecks, the time slips, and travel authorizations.
Okay.
So I just want to talk about it briefly, touch on the subject. I think we'll bring something back to the next board meeting, but I wanted to give you a heads up.
Oh.
And I'll describe it in further detail, but it would just be an ad at the end.
Commissioner Huxley?
Is this a workshop topic, really?
Well, I think it's a workshop topic because what it would be talking about is a issue that we have, which is, I think we do not have a policy that exactly, we used to have liaison commissioners who were authorized to sign time slips and travel requests for the county administrator and the county council. Since we had the county administrator, we got rid of liaison commissioners. We've fallen into a practice of county council submits a timesheet to either the chair or any other commissioner who happens to be here on that day. And I honestly don't know. I have Brenda fill out my travel expense request authorizations. I think I signed them, but I'm not sure if any commissioner approves them either. This came up because Clark Schroeder recently sent around a request for travel authorization, and there was a question as who's actually the right entity or person to sign this. And Chair Huxley and I and Julie Swift are going over the personnel regs that have the travel policy that talk about who the appointing authority is and those kind of things. And so it's actually sort of in limbo right now and so what we've been falling on is a practice. I'm sorry, Commissioner Huxley, you asked if it's a workshop topic. It's really just a heads up. Clark Schroeder has submitted a request for a travel reimbursement only to get advantage of an early hotel rate, so there's some urgency of getting some consensus on that. But there was a question of whether it had to be brought back to the board for board business to have the board vote on the travel expense reimbursement request or the per diem request. So again, it was something I just wanted to mention. That's all the mention I have of it. I think we'll talk about it at the next board meeting. So I have no other requests for amendments to the agenda.
And probably this issue didn't come up simply because of the way things were before an administrator came on board. Is that correct?
Right. Before we had an administrator, we had board liaisons, and they were delegated duties from the Board of Commissioners, and then we got rid of the liaison positions. And for everyone else, we have a system in place, except for the county administrator and county council, who report directly to the board. And like I said, the practice has been, I've been still using the pseudo liaison where I just go to the chair with my requests or any other commissioners here, and then those get processed through payroll. I've talked to payroll and accounts payable, and accounts payable says in the old days it was if any commissioner signed a pay claim, and so Louise Kallstrom said we probably want to revisit our pay claim processing policy as well. So really, the only reason it came up is because there's been some emails about whether any individual commissioner can authorize an expense request from the county administrator. And I think it's as legitimate question as any. There's probably an easy fix. It'll take some time, and if the board wants to do something in the meantime. So I think I'm going to work with Administrator Schroeder, and we'll probably bring something back for the 19th to get some clarification from the board on that. And really, again, that was really all the presentation I was going to give on the suggested amendment. So you can either not amend the agenda, or we'll just move on, however you want to do it.
Well,
It's a workshop
the
here.
cat's already out of the bag.
Yep,
So.
that's what in court they would call that a speaking objection, where that are frowned upon, by the way. Oh, hello there. So, okay, so that's all I
Do we
have.
have any amendments to the agenda officially now?
Thank you.
Heavens, no, not after
Thank you.
that.
All right. It only took
Okay,
9 minutes.
so do we have a motion to approve the agenda as not amended,
I'll approve the agenda as
as is?
presented.
Okay, I'll second that. Call for the question?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, moving on, discussion items. Lease option on former CCH space at County Colvin Building.
Thank you, and we have Beth Barker Hidalgo here from ORCA, as well as a Curry County Homeless Coalition, is that correct? And she wants to present, I imagine, a proposed use and those kind of things of the Colvin Building. And then what I submitted to the board and in the BOC packet, our standard form of a lease, and this is a sample that we use for OREC. And after Beth gives her presentation, I'd walk us through a lease and probably suggest some, terms and things like that. We also have Eric Hansen, facilities director here, who could give some information about, the Colvin Building itself. But I would turn it over to Beth if that's okay with the chair.
Okay,
All right.
that's fine. Commissioner
I
Huxley?
have one question, talking about policy and procedures.
Sure.
And this has to do with the agenda routing slip.
Okay.
It seems that there are 2 different agenda routing slips with the same date. Significantly different. One's half a page, one's a full page. Exactly the same form number, same revision date. That's one question.
Who's the contact person on each one? You
Pardon
say
me?
they're essentially the same, but were they filled out by different contact people?
Well, the short one, which I'd not seen until now, was filled out. Your name is the contact person. It's
Okay.
for this particular agenda item. Then did you put this agenda item on the workshop? Who authorized putting it on?
I believe I put it on, but it was authorized while Clark Schroeder was still here. So I think I submitted both agenda items, the BOLI and the lease. But then I think Clark Schroeder, while he was still here, putting the packet together on Friday. I was gone Friday. I submitted my materials, I believe, Thursday. Clark may have created his own materials and submitted them as well. I just don't know.
Okay, that's more confusion, not for a workshop, but
Right. I tried to
That's
follow the process
crazy.
of filling out.
Yeah.
I tried to follow the process. I don't know what happened after I submitted my materials.
different
Wasn't here.
forms, who actually, we've got policies for approval of agenda items.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I see one name, but that's not really the name that approved it, and it's a short form versus a long form, you can see the
Mm-hmm.
difference in the length.
Mm.
Same document number.
Yep,
So, okay, just
So I guess-
confused.
Bottom line, is that going to make a difference in the items on the agenda today?
I don't know. I'm just bringing it up.
Oh,
you know.
okay. So why don't we go ahead with Beth?
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you so much for your time. I'm Beth Barker Hidalgo. I live here in Gold Beach. To clarify, I'm here representing the Curry Homeless Coalition. I noticed on the agenda, my title with ORCA is on the agenda. I just want to clarify, this is a Curry Homeless Coalition project, although we do have an MOU for support from ORCA for the work that we do. I've got some materials that I would like to distribute to
Okay.
you.
You might put one on,
I have, yeah. So this is where we are today in terms of the overall process. This is something that for later, you might be interested in looking at. Publication that was printed by All Care. Photojournals did all the work writing those. So the Homeless Coalition has kind of been eyeballing the Colvin building for a little over a year with the idea that it would make a conveniently located sort of a one-stop resource center. And so to back up the history of this is I noticed that the Sheriff's Department had posted a job offering for a peer support specialist. And when I noticed that, I went and contacted Sergeant Denny and began a dialogue with him around amending the parole and probation biennium grant to, rather than hiring a peer support specialist, supporting a brick and mortar location where folks can be referred as they're released from the Curry County Jail and to re-enroll in Oregon Health Plan, because when folks are incarcerated in county jails, you well know they lose their Medicaid. It's not the first thing they think of when they get released from jail is, oh, I must get my health care back. And so we would like to encourage people with this referral process to come and engage with OHPS sisters who are Coast Community Health Center staff that have agreed to staff this resource center and provide that level of service. So they will re-enroll people in Oregon Health Plan or Medicaid. They can also enroll folks in SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, if they're eligible. We envision pipelining people to the Coordinated Entry Assessment Process, which is a new HUD-mandated program for community action agencies to assess homeless individuals and families. And ORCA's been conducting assessments since January of this year. We've conducted, I think, just about 100 assessments since we started here just in Curry County. Between Coos and Curry, we've done, I can't give you the exact number, but it's probably in the neighborhood of 300 assessments on individuals and families. So getting back to the one-stop resource. So far, what we have secured in terms of funding is the Criminal Justice Commission did approve the grant amendment request from Parole and Probation on August the 1st. So they're in support of this project and diverting the remainder of the parole and probation funds to support the one-stop. In your packet, you will see a breakdown of those funds and how they would be applied for just the reentry services. So that would be, I'm sorry, I didn't number these pages, but that's just right after the main proposal itself in your packet is that following page. So it says PMP reentry services budget. This is what we submitted to Criminal Justice Commission, and this is what they approved for the use of the remainder of those dollars. The next page after that is our revenue and expenses, proposed projected revenue and expenses for the project. And then following that are rent calculations. Our hope is to outreach to other community partners that serve the same population or near that population to rent space in the building for that purpose. So Oregon Coast Community Action has already expressed interest in renting 2 office spaces in the building, and that would support SSVF, our supportive services for veteran families, outreach in Gold Beach. My home office as an ORCA employee would then be in that building so that we have a footprint in Gold Beach. As it stands now, I meet people wherever I can find private office space in Gold Beach.
So would ORCA be paying that portion of the rent for
Yes.
you? Okay.
We have interest from Jan Barker, who just retired from Curry Community Health. She works with DV, domestic violence offenders, and she would like some space to do that work here in Gold Beach. She is using some space in the Curry Resource Center in Brookings right now, 1 day a week. She would like to have 1 day a week in Gold Beach as well to work with those offenders and with her therapies and group sessions. So that's the rent calculations. I've drafted an MOU. It's very similar to all the MOUs we have with our other partner agencies, which is Coast Community Health Center, ORCA. Let's see, who else do we have on the rest of our MOUs escape me at the moment. Oh, Advanced Health. We have an MOU, formerly Western Oregon Advanced Health, MOU with Advanced Health. for support for the coalition. There's no monetary exchange between these agencies. It's just supporting our efforts. And then Sergeant Denny worked up a referral form that is also part of your packet that you have. We have submitted a request from the Ford Family Foundation to support the employment services of this piece. We have verbal agreement with Quebec and possibly Goodwill Industries on board with the employment services. Quebec wants to be in the building twice a month on Thursdays to provide job search, soft skills, resume building, and then Goodwill would then be a pipeline to possible employment for folks that are able to be employed.
So is Quebec currently down in Brookings?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yep.
So they'll just be up here.
They'll have a footprint in Gold Beach to serve particularly the target population of the inmates being released from the county jail. And I've also, this isn't formal, but I've talked with Cindy, the manager at Kristen Help Thrift Store. If somebody has high barriers to employment and is unable to build a resume, she's willing to work with them and allow them to volunteer at the thrift store in various capacities and then provide feedback on their work ethic and performance so that we can build resumes for those folks and get them some work history, whether it's volunteer
question,
or
what
paid.
usually happens to these inmates if they don't have these resources?
I am going to meet a woman at 4 o'clock this afternoon who just got kicked from jail. Kicked is what they say. She is homeless, literally homeless. Someone in town is letting her stay on her couch last night, and she has another night at her home. So I will be meeting her here today at 4 o'clock to conduct a coordinated entry assessment with her. The assessment process is a super deep dive into personal stuff, risky behaviors, wellness, social determinants of health. All of that is taken into consideration as process. The longest assessment we've done to date, and by we, I mean ORCA, has taken 3 hours with an individual to really deep, and they have the right to refuse to answer any questions that we ask, but most people are participating fully and are allowing us to enter this data into the HMIS system, which is the Homeless Management Information System. It's a nationwide database.
So now with this one-stop shopping you're trying to set up,
Yes.
is the availability for the inmates to come up with some sort of housing going to be part of it, or?
Yes, and ORCA has about 13 housing projects that we administer now. So through that assessment process, if they're literally homeless, they go through the assessment process, we can determine what is the right type of housing. Is it transitional? Is it rapid rehousing? Is it permanent supportive housing? What kind of housing will help this person transition successfully back into the community is what the assessment process does. Now, if they're not literally homeless now, but they're in danger of becoming homeless because maybe they've lost their job due to the incarceration, or then we can look at efforts that are called homeless prevention. So we have some one-time funding. It's home TBA that we can use for deposit-only help for folks, if that's all they need, is a one-off to get them across the threshold and into safe, stable housing.
So are there any other, I'm always full of questions, don't mind me. Are there any other communities that have offices like these, the one-stop shopping, and how effective are they?
I believe Clark County has a similar, I don't know if it's exactly the same, but a similar one-stop or referral process for inmates released from their county jail. Sergeant Denny would probably have more information about the success rates of those programs. I've done some research, but I don't know if they've been operating long enough to show any reduction in recidivism rates or any of that. But I do know, I did research the Criminal Justice Commission's website, and they're 100%, 110% maybe behind these types of projects, because they're seeing a reduction in recidivism rates and increase in successful transition for folks that are able to go through a process similar to this. We want to provide what we call a client-centered planning process for them. They need to be involved in the process and have ownership in their own plan for transitioning back into the community for for this to be successful. It's been proven through patient-centered healthcare. Other social service networks use a client-based process for developing a plan moving forward, and that's how we would implement.
Well, as I see it, I think it would actually be a win-win, a win for the community and a win for those who have been incarcerated to be able to get the jobs and so forth that they need. So.
And I'd like to introduce a concept that might be a little foreign for you folks. It's new, it's rolling out nationwide, and FUSE is the acronym. FUSE stands for Frequent User System Engagement, and they measure both healthcare and criminal justice impacts on homeless individuals that are coming through these systems. So we measure how many ambulance trips, how many emergency room visits, urgent care visits, and how many incarcerations and number of nights in the hospital and or jail. And we add those all up, and that's the person's FUSE score. The higher the score, the higher the cost on the community as a whole. We obviously want to reduce those negative impacts on our criminal justice system and our healthcare system. Many of those folks have no Medicaid, Medicare, and so there's no recourse for the hospital to recoup some of those dollars unless they're able to get them enrolled in OHP and back bill for a reimbursement. There is a window of time that the hospital could do that, but FUSE is huge across the nation now, and it's a focus. I just had a 45-minute conversation with the representative from 211 in Portland. They're providing referral services to shelters for, I think it's Washington, Multnomah, Clark, and Lynn Benton and Lincoln counties. And they're tracking FUSE. They are tracking FUSE scores and reporting on those FUSE scores, and then looking back over a year, 2 years, are we reducing those FUSE scores, which that equates to reducing the cost burden on criminal justice systems.
So if you were able to get
healthcare.
these folks on OHP
Mhm.
right away, that certainly would help with the medical end.
Yeah, I think the Medicaid reimbursement rate is somewhere in the 63 to 67%. I mean, that's better than a goose egg for the
Mhm.
hospital. They're able to at least recoup some of their costs
Right.
for health care. And the last piece I wanted to share is we just purchased software yesterday to build a database that we can customize for our local needs to gather the data of so we can measure where are we now, we can set some metrics and goals for reducing the burden on the community, particularly Gold Beach because of the jail and the hospital locations, but countywide as well. We can start. There are a lot of people doing great work with this population, but they're not necessarily capturing that data, and we feel like that's a missed opportunity for us to measure where we are and where we want to be, and then go after more grant dollars to serve that population.
So you want more of a coordinated effort, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good.
Collaborative, the more the merrier is how we see it. It takes a village.
Well, I've asked lots of questions. Does anybody else have any questions? Commissioner Huxley?
You'd mentioned, or I won't say you mentioned, the sheriff's department, and this was through the recidivism tracking that they've done and some of these grants that they've participated in prior years. They would categorize, hopefully as objectively as possible, because there was always some subjectivity in trying to categorize individual inmates and their potentials, what they felt, would be successful after release,
Mhm.
or their the history of while they were incarcerated.
Mhm.
And they had them, I don't remember the particulars, but they had them categorized in little concern after, these are my words, not their terms, but little concern after release to very significant concern, you know, repeat history. They had one or two categories that they would not even put any in the system that they were working with the Department of Justice on the recent grants, because it would not, in their opinion, fare well. What are your plans as far as I would hope that you don't just take anyone and everyone that comes out.
No, there's a
given
referral.
the seriousnesses of some of the crimes and the history of those
Right.
being released.
So the referral process, my understanding from meeting with Sergeant Denny, is he anticipates 10 to 14, what he labeled as high risk, we like to call it high barrier, folks that we would most likely be working with. 10 to 14 a month is, and the jail commander, I assume, and parole and probation would make that decision as to who they're going to refer to us. It would be done at the parole and probation level. So, and the referral form is in your packet, and that's the tool they would use for sending folks over and being able to track who we're working with, and so we can follow that person and follow their success or not. I mean, we do have strong interest from both CCOs in this project. Advanced Health and All Care are asking us to collect specific data on their clients. If someone comes out and they've been enrolled in Medicaid and they were formerly an All Care or Advanced Health client, chances are they're going to go back on that, assigned back to those CCOs rather than open card. And so they're asking us to measure data on their clients as well. And we have a request to Advanced Health for a 3-year contribution to this project. We're still waiting. Peg Crawley is our contact. She met with the IPA board last Thursday evening with our proposal, and we're waiting to hear if they're going to fund this proposal or not. She's got a couple questions I need to respond to today. And then All Care, you may know I'm a CAC member, a Community Advisory Council member for All Care, and I happen to know there's about $19,000 and some change left in the housing budget, the monies that were returned to All Care. So we've asked for that money to support this project and the housing piece of the project. The CAC will kick in another $800 to make it an even $20,000, but we've asked for $20,000 from All Care to support the project. So our coordinated care organizations are very interested in partnering with this project so that we can, again, get a baseline on how those clients are doing and then measure their success rate as we move forward and put them through the programs that we offer. We can't force anyone to participate in these programs, but the hope is if we can get out of 10 inmates that are released and referred, if we can get 2 or 3 of them to break that cycle and not end up in that rotating catch and release system, we can reduce the burden on the Sheriff's Department, the cost burden, and the county as a whole, as well as targeting that healthcare cost burden.
And I think it's really important that you do keep the data to see how successful you are in your programs.
The database will have capability to track volunteer hours. We are meeting with the Peer Advisory Council, which is that they were operating under the umbrella of Curry Community Health. That was their fiscal agent. They have no fiscal agent right now, so the coalition is negotiating with the PAC to determine what are their needs and can we take them under our 501c3 status and have them operate and volunteer to help work with some of these folks to help them navigate the systems and help them to transition. So it's not done yet, but that's another potential piece to this project, is that we would have access to the Peer Advisory Council and their support network of volunteers to work with these folks. So.
Commissioner Boyce?
I think you're familiar with Southern Oregon Workers Investment Board. I serve on that board. Have you given them a presentation by chance?
I have. You were absent that
I
day.
missed that one. That's
You
why
actually
I
came
asked.
in late. You were there. You just were a little bit after my presentation, but I did present to SOIB about this project. And
Good.
Georgia is my liaison there, and Georgia Nellen, and so I'm not sure whether there's any monetary assistance or perhaps some opportunity for office furnishings, hardware, software, that sort of thing that
Put
they
in a
may
good
be
word
able
for
to.
you. But the reason I ask, as the economy improves, there's demand for labor, and that's part of the combination here to getting these folks in homes and matching up. And so, you know, especially small businesses, you know, needs employees, and so the educational part of that and the encouragement, the training. And so, yeah, I'm sorry I missed that presentation, but I'm going to be seeing if perhaps you can do that again. Thank you, and I apologize, Madam Chair, for being late. I was at a fire meeting. Thanks, Ms.
I think we already excused you.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, any other questions from the commissioners? Council Huddle?
Thanks. I just have some questions. So you mentioned the resource center run by the veterans down in Brookings. So that's a county-owned building. I think we still own it, and I think Tony's, you know, primarily assigned to that building, and then the different entities who are in there, each one of them, I think, has a lease with the county as the landlord. It almost sounds like you're proposing to create in the Colvin building something for more or less homeless, but a certain percentage of whom would be released prisoners. But I'm trying to figure out who your main client base is or what your focus is. So if we were, and then you would act as, I didn't hear you say, you've talked about having sub-agreements with, you know, a whole bunch of different groups, it sounds like. But I'm trying to figure out what we're getting to here. Is it that the housing coalition or the homeless coalition would be running the Colvin building essentially under a lease with the county, and then you all, our typical leases say there's no subletting allowed, and it sounded like you were saying different groups who want a day here, a day there, like they have down at the South Resource Center. So I'm trying to figure out, you know, for me, I'm listening to the whole thing, and it sounds real nice, but I'm trying to figure out how to make it, how to structure it. And so what's your vision for the structure of, you know, how these services would be provided to the population and what the role of the county is?
Our vision for how the services would be provided is we have proposed hours of operation at about 37 hours a week, and with some Saturday hours. And I cannot speak to our partner agencies as far as their commitment to hours of availability in the building, or at this point in time, it looks like Orca is on board with renting 2 offices full-time.
Renting from who?
Well, if we need, sounds like we need to have a more detailed conversation about that. If that is, if the county does not allow for subletting, then we would have to look at.
Well, it says no subletting without permission, and so again, I'm trying to figure out, you know, how do you envision structuring this? What's the, you know, what do you, how's it going to be? Again, I don't want to say compartmentalized, but again, I represent the county. What are you asking for us? What's our role here in this operation? You mentioned there was a Criminal Justice Commission approved a grant amendment to allow funds to support this project out of the Sheriff's Department, but I'm assuming those monies were to our Sheriff's Department for a use, and then I'm envisioning out of that, so that money's coming to the county, and to get it to your use, there would have to be some agreement there between, you know, the end users in the county. I'm just trying to figure out how many different agreements do we need. You know, how's this going to be structured? What do you think? And what, you know, and what's your ask of the county? Thanks. Sorry.
So, right at this point in time, our ask of the county is, if you look at the proposal, we obviously do not have the funding to support 100% of what I saw the last lease agreement that was proposed with the Curry Health Network. So our ask of the county up front would be an in-kind contribution on the rent. We could pay, right out the gate, we could pay up to 50% of what the 75 cents per square foot that is on the table now. and then step increase that as we build more services and bring more partners on board for year 2, year 3. So right now the county is not receiving any revenue from that building because nobody's in there. So what we propose is that you would at least be getting some revenue year 1, and we can increase that revenue as we move forward in year 2 and 3. Our goal overall is to secure contracts with the coordinated care organizations for a sustainable funding stream. They look at our data that we produce, and if they find it to be valuable and that we're having a great impact on cost burden reduction, then they would be willing, or that's what I'm being told by both CCOs, is they would entertain contracts with the Homeless Coalition to continue these services. So that's the ask on the table, is that would there be wiggle room to negotiate on the lease terms in terms of the square footage cost? And also the lease I saw was a 5-year term, so we would like to ask for a 2-year with an option.
I think the term of the lease is the 5-year term is negotiable. Certainly.
Yeah.
I see Eric there talking about the 75 cents a square foot. I saw some information about what the average costs of water, sewer, utilities were for that building. I don't know if you recall those off the top of your head, but is that how we came up with the 75 cents a square foot? Because my recollection is that now this building is a different animal than that building over there, but I thought our square footage rate for nonprofits was less than 75 cents a square foot, but it's been a while since I got involved in any of that. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you have any information that can, kind of inform the discussion today, that'd be great.
60 or 65?
That 75 cents a square foot, my name's Eric Hansen, I'm the facilities director, was come up from John Hitt.
Okay.
Came out with that number. I calculated 65 cents as a non-commercial governmental rate would be adequate. But what I understand is this is not a sustainable funding. These monies sound like they're one-time payments. So a 2-year option seems a little short. Unfortunately, this is a great project that would tie up that building for any other potential renters. A 5-year would be much more appreciated as far as my budgeting requirements. 2 years is doable. That can be negotiated, but I only count 4 offices that would be required from the agencies that you mentioned. I'd hate to put 4 offices in and then leave the rest of them vacant, because the power, all those bills would be the same if that building was full or
Half.
4 offices. That those numbers don't really change.
Okay.
So my question for you, Eric, would be is if we were to go at this lower rate, is that even going to cover the cost of the utilities, or?
It would just cover the cost of the
Okay.
utilities.
Okay.
We'd have to negotiate any remodeling requirements, janitorial and trash. Those are still out there. But that 65 cents would cover those.
Is it 75 or 65?
The 65
Oh.
would still.
Commissioner Boyce?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just the 2-year, the advantage I think that gives us is for a test period, and that might be more. We can all kind of chip in and because there's going to be some unanticipated aspects of this that nobody can think that far ahead. So it gives us a chance to work together and maybe look, even after a year, if it goes relatively smooth, then we could extend it at that period of time. You could also have a buyout, though, too, if we had an opportunity to sell that building or something that would reasonable amount of time there as well.
How many square foot are we talking, do you think, that Beth under your proposal? Oh, go ahead, Eric.
Total building is 5,000 right now. Parks and Rec has 300. that 5,000.
And then how much, Beth, do you think you would need out of that building? Oh, you might have to pop up to the.
I would have to go back and do some calculations on that. But with the two offices for Orca, I didn't mention this, but we also have a private mental health provider that lives in Brookings that is looking for, and she's set up to bill OHP, and she's looking for a footprint in Central Curry also to provide mental health services to their target population and others in the community. As you know, we lack the mental health providers to meet the demand. Last county health rankings report was there's 310 patients per one provider in Curry. So there are other partners in the
Wings?
yeah,
Sure.
but I just didn't. We don't have any commitment, and we haven't had any formal discussions, so I didn't want to.
Yeah.
Well, if those folks came in, would they be setting up separate leases? Or would
Well,
it be?
that's the conversation that we
Right.
would need to have is what is the county willing to allow in terms of subletting, and if that's not a comfortable place, then we can look at a different arrangement for that.
Sure, and the general idea, with subletting, if you're the landlord and you lease out to a tenant at a rate, and then if the tenant just sublets and pockets all the revenues from the rents, that's kind of taken away from the landlord in a sense. So that would be one of the issues with subletting.
Well,
We'd
and
have to
another-
just see, what the proposed sublets were. In other words, and I saw on one of these grants, it said there was like $4,500 for rent. I thought is one of the figures, but maybe I didn't read it right.
Well, and I guess another issue would be is if the sub-leases were still at 25 cents a square foot, maybe that's not advantageous for the
Right.
county.
Right. I think, we have to lease at the people we lease to get the not-profit rate have to be not-profits. We can't realize a profit, but Eric's indicated we have a lot of expenses on that building with utilities, water, sewer, power, that, that may result in a higher per square foot than we charge for this building. Just not sure. It looks like we charge anywhere from, I don't know, 25 to 75 cents or something on this building. I'm not sure. Anyway, and Louise is here. She may have some knowledge about our rents. I don't know why. It seems like you came at an opportune time. I'm not sure, Louise.
Is that why you came? They sit and listen to the meetings, I know.
Louise calls from County Accountant. The live stream is not doing well. That's why I had to come down here because it keeps stopping and starting. It's not, and I miss what everybody's saying. I have a thing in my office that says something about the rates, but I didn't bring it down here with me, but I could go and get it if you'd like me to.
Well,
So
Thanks, Eric.
I'll just run down and get it because it's a rate thing.
okay.
Oh, okay.
So if I could try to summarize where my understanding is, there's a population that has some needs that Beth's proposing serving and using our building to serve, and in coordination with some funding from a Criminal Justice Commission grant to the sheriff and some other things is outlined on her materials. And you just submitted those materials today, is that right?
You have the top, I believe, the initial proposal, and then I added the breakdown of some of the budgetary items within the proposal, and added the draft MOU just got drafted yesterday.
Okay.
And the referral form, or the additional paperwork that you have.
So really, I think this was put on the agenda today for study by the board. I think as you see some of the issues identified, it would take a good amount of staff work to put all the pieces together. And I think Clark Schroeder, before dedicating the staff time to this task, wanted to know if the board was interested and felt it was a good use of staff time. I think he just wanted to make sure he was on the same page with the board before working up a proposal to present for action on the board, whether there was merit in taking further time on this. So, and so that's something if the board's inclined to give direction on, to spend more time on this. So really that's all I had, unless Beth had anything else. So, because right now it's really a lot of pieces still to put together. Okay, so.
Okay, so is the board interested in further pursuing this? Do we want to hear from Louise first? Maybe first before we...
Yeah.
Louise Kallstrom, County Accountant. So the only thing that I have that I know about that is official has any kind of rates is this order. Basically, it's for this building, and it was done at the time that we assigned, sorry, we assigned the marketing of any open spaces in this building to the South Coast Development Council.
So that's just for this building?
So that's just
Okay.
for this building. That's the only official thing on rates that I even have, so
Okay.
I don't know if there's any more.
And then I had one more question for Beth. As far as urgency timelines, I know probably yesterday or what have you, but what's your, what have you been talking to your customers and partners about deliverables and when this thing will come to be? What's your goal on that as far as, again, it's time and effort, resources. So what do you,
Right.
your idea
So we started working on this project in June.
there? With, but how
with
much
parole
has
and
that worked?
probation.
Okay.
What we're shooting for now, a soft launch, would be November 1 to be able to open and start providing services to the target population. As it stands now, with the approval from Criminal Justice Commission, as soon as we have a lease in place and brick and mortar location to do this work, we can request the $15,000. And in January 1, we can make the second request for the remainder of the biennium budget and put all those funds towards the work through the end. It's December 2019 is the end of the grant cycle.
So if I could, just a follow-up there. So the money coming from criminal justice, juvenile parole, or adult parole and probation, I'm assuming, or and we're not talking about a juvenile facility here, right? Okay, good. And then the only other question would be, and again, we talked about the population you're serving is general homeless, part of which is made up of released prisoners on parole and probation. Is there going to be any issue if the P&P grant money goes to people who aren't in the P&P program at all, or how's that going to be?
The P&P grant money is for parole and probation
Okay.
inmates released from the jail.
All
It
right.
is not, we would love to layer in services for general homeless population at
Okay.
some point, but that is not, the target population initially are inmates released
Oh.
under parole and probation.
Sorry, okay, I because
Right.
of the homeless coalition entity, I thought we were serving a bigger population, some of which is P&P, but you're saying this the way it's going to start is just going to be P&P. Okay, I
Yes.
missed that piece.
And then,
Sorry.
a subset of that population may very well be homeless.
Of course.
And we'll capture that information as we assess those folks
Thank
when
you.
they come through.
Thanks.
Commissioner Boyce?
But doesn't that improve the odds you're going to have generally better or good behavior?
It is supposed that, yeah, that would be the outcome, is that we, again, reduce our recidivism rates and reduce the impacts on our criminal justice system and help folks with a more successful transition back into the community.
Okay. Thanks, that's all I had, so,
Okay, so I'm looking for some direction. Commissioner Huxley?
I would like, just on the rental rates and the questions that have arisen here, of which there are many, to where is it even viable financially, from time to the offices to the utilities. I would like to see just some additional information there before we say just have at it and commit
Well, I don't
dozens and
think
dozens and
there's-
dozens of hours
Oh, I see what
to
you're
all the
saying.
rest of the stuff before we even know, is it viable? Because I'm not convinced it's viable. And I don't think anyone here is convinced that it is, because we have too many questions on the
Right. And
Correct.
just to be clear, I mean, I know I'm what you might call lowballing in terms of the rent right now, but this is a negotiation. It's a jumping off point. We're open to increases if that's necessary to cover.
Council Huddle?
Thanks. Sometimes I've been in a situation where, I've been on boards of groups where we apply for grants, and sometimes when you present to them your needs, in other words, having a rent figure that, is viable. If, let's say, for instance, the figure you're proposing doesn't work, we come back and say, this is what we're going to need to cover it and what have you. There may be some benefit in that to you to go out to grants and say, listen, our needs are this, we tried really hard, et cetera. So this is a proposal and so you're not opposed to us taking a hard look at what it would take for us to come out okay.
Absolutely not. And the other thing to consider is if there's a reduction in rent, that would be considered an in-kind contribution from the county, which also helps us with local matches that may be required for grants that are out there. So we could calculate that in-kind contribution as if there are grants that require that local in-kind.
Okay.
Commissioner Boyce?
Thank you again, Madam Chair. On this project, forgive me, but if I could handpick someone in this county that could take this project and see if it is valid with the work you've done, I would absolutely pick you. So we have series of problems in our community and our county, communities in our county. And so to justify staff time, to make every possible effort to help solve this problem, Madam Chair, yes. If you're interested in consensus or direction for staff, I would vigorously pursue this project.
Well,
Thank
and
you.
I think Commissioner Huxley has a good point. We need to look at the rent and see where we are. We can't afford to have a really low ball figure and lose a lot of money on it, but by the same token, I think it's an important project. So I'd say let's look at the rent and what are the actual costs first before we dive in. Would that be amenable to you, Bev?
Absolutely.
I'll be in
We've been working on it for nearly 6 months now. Another month or two isn't really gonna kill us. So,
If we need an expense accounted on a monthly basis or biannual, something like that, then that might be good information to have. But I'm not hearing that we're going to lose. The county is going to lose money on this. Did I miss? I did show up late. I apologize again, but.
I mean, unless the
I don't-
utilities are insurmountable, that's where we're going to see, or custodial services is where we're going to see the pinch. If we're not able to meet at least your minimum cost to support the building, then but we need to know what that is. If we have that figure from the county as to what your minimum costs are going to be to support the project, then we know where we're starting from. We know what could be viable moving forward.
See, and I think that's important to know what our costs are going to be, and I think you agree with that. So.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
that's why Eric was up here a few minutes ago, and why he was asked a couple of questions on that.
Right.
So.
Okay.
Okay, is
I
everybody in
think-
consensus
I
that
think
we
it's clear
look
for-
at the rent
yep.
and see what's viable first?
That's clear enough for me. I'll communicate it to Mr. Schroeder. And then Beth, he'll probably be, the timing is he's just out. But I think he'll probably be your primary contact. And then is it Denny you're working with over there?
Yeah, David
Okay,
Denny, yeah.
good.
Sergeant Denny.
Very good. Anything else?
I just would like to share, a week ago today at the Checo Library in the evening was a homeless panel discussion sponsored by KCIW, and I was overwhelmed with this show of support for supporting increased services for the target population in Curry County. There was standing room only in the library. There were, at one point, 136 people were counted as having attended. And I would guess that about a third of those were people experiencing homelessness. Their voices were heard. We did open mic for the last hour and allowed people to come up and just free for all. And there were folks that had serious safety concerns. And I want to just be clear, we are not opposed to hearing those concerns. In fact, we welcome those concerns because we can't address those concerns if we don't know what they are. So we're open to hearing from people who support and oppose. increasing services to homeless population, because we can't address those concerns if we don't know what they are. And there were some folks there that did express concerns and had negative experiences in terms of criminal activity. What I would say to that is crime is not tied directly to homelessness. People who are housed commit crimes. So I think oftentimes we have a tendency to broad brush the population with some stereotypical assumptions. But again, we're offering a space for people to express their concerns over the target population, and we want to hear all sides of the debate, if you will.
Council Huddle?
Thanks. So Beth, up on the screen, and I'm not going to walk the board through our sample lease. I don't think we're at that point yet on this project. But that sample lease, for instance, said the lease premises shall be used for office space. Mm-hmm. And then it says a tenant cannot use it for any other purpose. I think what will be important, when we get down to that, is for you to describe in as good a detail as possible what the uses will be. You mentioned several different entities who do several different functions. Mm-hmm. So as best as possible, come up with your list there. That'll help me the most. So,
okay.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, I think next on the agenda is the discussion related to updates on laws and rules regarding pay equity.
Thank you.
John Huddle.
This came in it came in, I think, to the former chair, Tom Huxley from the Bureau of Labor and Industries, and they are making rules to implement and fulfill their functions on some new statutes that were adopted. What I'd like to do is start with the statutes. These are in your packet. Let me just see if I can find a way. JJ, do you know how that I could put these up on the board or up on there? I believe they're in the packet. So I'm gonna click
Madam
here.
Chair,
Uh-huh.
the very end, I'd like to give just a 1 or 2
Okay.
minute fire report update.
Oh, at the end? Sure.
Yeah.
Are we 9:12? It's okay. Sure. Pay equity statute changes, all right. It should be about right. So this is the notice of proposed rulemaking. It says the last day to comment is 9/28. And again, rules and rulemaking and legislation is policy. There's some policy involved. Some of it is technical. So it's possible that staff could have just said, these are the changes we're going to make, or perhaps staff could have just submitted the changes or the comments on the rules up to BOLI without board input. But because I see rules and rulemaking and legislation as policy, my recommendation on seeing this was to just bring it to the board. So it started with the statute change. I'm trying to get to that. Oh, the statute, there should have been no, here's the statute change right here. So the statute that was changed was RS 652 and dealing with pay equity. And the old statute is here, the one that exists. It talks about who an employee is and who an employer is, and what a rate and what unpaid wages are. They came up with a new definition in the legislative of what compensation is, wages, salary, bonuses, benefits, fringe benefits, equity-based compensation. And then they later in the rules define what equity-based compensation was. When I first read the statute, I thought equity-based compensation was treating people fairly, but equity-based compensation is more of a technical term, such as stocks and bonds and equities, like you hear on the equities market. So that's a market term. Talks about who an employer is, talks about an equal pay analysis and an evaluation process to assess and correct wage disparities among employees who perform work of comparable character. So this was a new definition, a new requirement that we conduct an equal pay analysis. And Julie Swift will talk about what some of our current practices are in this respect. Then it gets to, talks about sexual orientation. It used to be that it was only based on the wage disparity could only be based on a person's sex, and now they have changed it to be sexual orientation, which is slightly different, and they'll go into that. And then veteran status. The bottom line is what they're doing is they're changing from just wage equity with respect to sex to now they're broadening it to wage equity with respect to, I'll call it protected status, or some of the other protected status that you've heard of. And then working conditions, environment, hours. This is a new definition in the statutes. And then work of comparable character, substantially similar knowledge, skill, effort, responsibility, working conditions, regardless of description or job title. And then here's the old statute prohibition, and it says in any manner discriminates, again, between the sexes. So really, they had it there, and the new thing says protected class. So that was a change from, again, opposite sex. So they're changing it to expand that. And then we cannot, so this says what it's unlawful to do. It's unlawful to, discriminate people, and it says on the basis of protected class, it used to, in payment of wages, and it used to say opposite sex. And then you can't screen job applicants based on current or past compensation. So that's a nuance, and Julie will talk to that, but it says you can't screen them based on that. So you can't just pre-screen based on how much they used to make. But when it comes time, after you've got a qualified candidate, when it comes time to negotiate, I think the law still allows us to consider what they used to make, but you can't just screen them out on that basis. Determine compensation for a position based on current or past compensation of a prospective employee. And then you cannot, because I guess the premise there is if there was wage inequality before, if you consider what they used to make, you'll just be perpetuating the wage inequality. And then it talks about you can do it if the difference in compensation is based on a bona fide factor. They talk about a seniority system, a merit system, system that measures earnings by quantity or quality, including piece rate, workplace locations, if there's necessary travel, education, training, experience, or any combination. The one question that's come up, and I'll just do a little foreshadowing here, and perhaps it could be more clear. They talk about bona fide factors, seniority system, merit system, where you have probably seen the idea of seniority systems before is in collective bargaining agreements. And so they say you cannot discriminate in pay based on protected status, but some of the questions that have come up and that I've seen from other commentators is, well, what about different bargaining units that value, what if one bargaining unit values vacation more than insurance or something, and how, those kind of things. So we would like them to be a little more clear that, different bargaining units are different. So again, the old act there, the new one. The interesting part here is this says that each time, so basically every pay period, if you're discriminating, every pay period is a new event. So it's a new wrongdoing for purpose of calculating whether they've complied with their statute. So whenever you're harmed and you want to bring an action, you have to bring it within a certain time. And what they're saying here is every time that you issue a new pay period, then that starts the clock running again for them to bring an action.
So does this apply to all employers, not
It-
just governmental
I believe it
employers?
does apply to all employers because a lot of the language here, especially the part about the pay equity, we don't offer stock options and those kind of things. So it does make me think that they're talking about all employers. But then we get very specific, the last one here with respect to number 7, this is public body tort claim notice. And tort claim notice, they used to have to give tort claim notice within 6 months, 180 days, and this allows it to go to 300 days. So for this particular cause of action on a violation of pay equity against a public employer, they have to give us a tort claim notice within 300 days of the alleged violation, not 6 months. So they've extended the period of them to, I don't know why. But that's the statute. We're not allowed to make comments on the statute. So those are the changes in the law. And then BOLI then administers these laws, and they adopt rules. And so what BOLI's done is put out their proposed rules, and the proposed rules are these here, and they start with definitions. And one of the issues here was the definition of benefits. And it says benefits are the rate of contribution. They give a sub A and a sub B. The rate of contribution that an employer makes irrevocably to a trustee or third person under a plan, fund, or program. So that would be, I think our OTET might be a plan or fund. It's a trust, I think. And then the next one is the rate or cost of the employer providing benefits to an employee beyond what's required by federal, state, or local law. And then it says pursuant to an enforceable commitment to carry out a financially responsible plan or program. I personally wasn't sure why they chose to use such different words for these two concepts. I probably don't know enough about employee compensation packages, but here why they say makes irrevocably, and here they say enforceable commitment. I mean, I would have preferred they use the similar words there, because you have, well, what's the difference between making an irrevocable contribution versus providing an enforceable commitment? Maybe one is past, one is future. But then it says carry out a financially responsible plan or program, and here they say a plan, fund, or program. Why didn't they include financially responsible? I'm not the rule maker. I don't kind of do it, but I am a professional nitpicker, so that would be kind of why I'd ask these questions. The other question people asked is, it says, including but not limited to the following. So this is saying that if you're going to make a enforceable commitment to a responsible plan or program, which is committed to the employee, including but not limited to the following, here they define what some of the plans or programs they can commit to are. These type of things, medical hospital care, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You kind of can get a sense of these. But what the other question is, well, do these subcategories, the capital subcategories, apply to these type of plans or programs as well? Is there any limit, or should the rulemaking, I know this is probably one of your most fascinating workshops ever, and you're riveted, but
Back to page 20 so we can
thank
pick
you.
up on the new
Yes,
stuff. Yeah.
sure, Commissioner Boyce. I will go through this all again in very deep detail. So that was one question there. They talk about what a bonus is. They talk about what compensation is. Didn't really have too many questions about these. Equal pay analysis is interesting. It means an evaluation process to assess and correct wage disparities among employees who perform work of comparable character. And so they don't really say exactly what your equal pay analysis is there. They give the definition of sexual orientation, talk about unpaid wages, veteran status. Those sexual orientation, veteran status were part of what's making up the, here they give work of comparable character means work that requires substantially similar knowledge, skill, etc. So these definitions will come in handy when they tell you what the do's and don'ts are then under the new rules. Here's something, and Julie can speak to this. Screening seeking and screening job applicants based on compensation. And basically, you saw the prohibition says you can't do it. And they say it's unlawful employment practice, and it includes using information, however obtained, about their current compensation to determine their suitability for employment. And this says at any stage of the hiring process. I still think you can negotiate based on what they used to make. Okay. A job, say that again, Louise. What was your comment there? Do you think it says later that you can't even negotiate, or you
See
can?
the one that's sub 5, sections 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
After the employer makes an offer of employment, that includes the amount of compensation, so you can't even do it while you're.
Okay. It doesn't prevent that. You're allowed to do that. Sure, I think that's what I was talking about. But and Julie, why don't you come on up and talk about, we used to ask for past wages on work.
Right, Julie Swift, payroll and HR. On our application, we had a question of what your current salary is, what you started at, what you finished at, what your current salary is. We removed that from our application pursuant to this change, so we no longer ask that question up front. And what it says is on number 3, or when we talk about under number 2, if we're talking about transferring an employer or an employee or moving him to a different department, we can then determine what we're going to pay them in the new department or the new position based on what they're making now, but not as a deciding factor on whether we're going to give that person that transfer or that new position. So we can use for a current employee what they're currently making and what they're going to make in a different position. It also talks about unsolicited disclosure. So if we don't ask if we don't ask the applicant, but the applicant says, hey, this is what I make, then that can kind of give us an idea of what they may accept for us to offer. As long as it's unsolicited, we can't just ask for it. Yeah, so we can't determine what we're going to pay them based on what they were making somewhere else, and we do that. We've taken that off of our application.
Thank you.
So what you do is just offer them something and they can take it or leave it, basically?
And well, I think that's kind of what this is as long as we have a position and we say this is what we pay for this position, and we have a salary range, which we do, and we say, well, John Smith, this is what we're going to offer you. This is within our range. And if John says that's not enough, depending on his experience and depending on his qualifications, we can change that rate somewhere in that range to possibly get the employee or the person to come to work here. So it's still kind of a negotiation, but it's the position is already in a range, and if this person has a ton of qualifications, we can determine where in that range to put them. So if we say we're going to start you at step A, and he says, but I've been doing that kind of work, I've been doing that job for 10 years, we can say, oh, well, maybe we can accommodate that somewhere else in the range to allow for his experience.
Okay. Mr. Boyce?
Well, good work, and including Administrator Schroeder for being updated on this. As we look for prospective employees, this will help to let them know we're in coordination with the state, the new laws, and so I doubt it would be a simple adoption, perhaps, of this as part of our employment strategy and process. So if we need to do that so the public knows, I think we could.
Well, actually, by the process that we use, by using LGPI to put our positions in salary ranges, we're kind of already doing this because, and with the previous salary committee that we had, that we kind of just don't have so much anymore because we just don't have the employee base to do that. But when we do have a new job description, we put it through LGPI, and LGPI says based on the knowledge and experience and the type of work that's being done, this is where that position falls into a salary range. And so we take that salary range, and when we advertise a position, that's what we use. So we're kind of already doing it. So we're taking like qualifications of like positions and putting them in a salary range that's equal to what others are. When we originally did the salary study back in 2001 with LGPI, that was the first thing they did, was put our jobs in line with each other. So each person with their position did an evaluation of this is what I do, this is what my qualifications are, this is how much time I spend doing these different things. And so LGPI took all that data and put them into salary ranges. And so that lined up like positions with like salaries. So for instance, if you have someone you're calling a department specialist 2 and their salary range 5, and you've got someone doing basically the same duties, maybe in a different department, but requiring the same knowledge and experience, and because you really like that person, you're going to say, I'm going to pay him range 7 because I like that person. LGPI came back and said, no, like jobs get like salary ranges. And so we were put into line, and we still use that process today. So
do
we're
we
kind
spend
of
the
ahead of
time
the
and
game.
this time and effort on this day just so that we could be informed, updated?
Well, now it's a requirement. Now it's a new statute that
State
equal
requirement.
pay. It's an equal pay and equity pay for all for positions, which we're kind of ahead of the game because we did this a long time ago.
So question, does this come into play just when people are starting, or is it?
No, it's across the board.
Okay, so we've got some of the employees that are union, some that are not, and is this going to be a problem?
It could be. It could be, and that's one of the things that John and I talked about, because you've got people in a non-represented range 8 that are making less than a union range 8 because the union has received COLAs. So I don't know if that's going to get us into an issue of compliance or not. We kind of
Right.
briefly discussed that.
Well, the big picture is that this statute is to prohibit pay inequities or pay discrepancies based on a protected status. And so if our pay discrepancy is based on, and it said you could allow pay discrepancies based on programs of seniority, et cetera. And so I think you can interpret it to say, if you're in a different bargaining unit, whether you're in a bargaining unit or not, that's not a protected status, not listed in the statutes. But I think the rules and the statutes could do a better job of making that clear. And that might be one thing that the board comes away with saying, yeah, make sure that that's the case.
I was going to say, I think we ought to check on that.
Okay, good. We'll do
agree.
that. Thank you.
I think we have our
And
bases covered.
that's why we're having the workshop, just to make sure you're informed as to what our options are going forward with these comments to the state.
So the whole impetus for this law, or whatever they call it, rule, was because of the protected classes, would you say?
Correct, but the way they've written it, it could be open to interpretation. It seems to be very broadly worded, and so we just want to make sure in the rulemaking that they kind of narrow the focus and refocus back on the initial intent, which was protected status. And here it talks about what work of comparable character is. So Julie Swift and I have gone down these lists, and it says it's no single factor. It talks about skill, knowledge, effort, responsibility, and working conditions, certifications, education, experience, training. Skills could be ability, agility, coordination. These are some things that you probably have seen these type of things before. Some of these show up in our job descriptions. For instance, you must be able to stand for 8 hours a day or, 3 hours at a time if you're a flagger on a road crew. We have these kind of things. So what I've asked Julie to do, and what she'll do with the LGPI folks, is go over some of our job descriptions and make sure we're considering these factors in job descriptions. And then the
Noise,
next,
air quality.
yep, well, dust, isolation. Again, these are working conditions that, people need to know about. So, and then they have this nice language here that they'll probably have to flesh out in some cases, but it says minor differences in all of the above will not prevent jobs from being comparable. So there will be probably some argument over whether the difference is minor or less, not other than minor. Then this talks about bona fide factors that may be considered in paying employees work of comparable character at different compensation levels. And it says if it's based on one or more bona fide factors that may be considered include a seniority system. And again, I think they could have simply said, and a merit system. So they talk about systems and systems, two different kinds, seniority, merit, or a system that measures quantity or quality, including piece rate. And then a workplace location could have a cost of living, desirability, access, minimum wage zones or minimum wage hours. And then they talk about necessary travel. So these are things that you can consider when having different rates of pay. And then it talks about a system down here means a devised, coherent, consistent, verifiable, and reasonable method that was used at the time of the alleged violation to identify, measure, and apply. And this is what I think Julie has talked about with LGPI. And so the two things that we'll be doing in light of these new rules is making sure our job descriptions as well as our job and employment evaluations consider these type of things. And then when Julie is doing the job classification work, they consider those as well. And then we'll have a system set up. And again, they've kind of hinted at seniority and the other type of systems. But I believe we would need to, make sure that they're not talking about collective bargaining or distinguishing it out.
So
Now,
did they set up a timeline for all of this?
these rules and the statute will come into effect January 2019. So we have a few months to get it all sussed out. And then
Who
determining.
wrote these rules?
These rules are written by the Bureau of Labor and Industries, State of Oregon, BOLI.
Bully, is that what they call him?
Not bully, but BOLI.
B-O-L-I.
Oh.
It's a big
Bureau of-
outfit.
Bureau of Labor and Industries.
Big
Maybe there is some homonymity there, perhaps. So really, and then it talks about this
get
last
off that.
one is that you cannot reduce. So let's say, for instance, you do a study and you decide, this person is actually getting paid too much for a comparable job. You can't reduce the higher wage down to the lower. You have to increase the lower up to the higher. So those, and then an employer who surveys an equal pay analysis to elicit protected class status must inform employees. So I don't know if we ever, Julie, do you know if we survey our employees about this? This talks about an employer who surveys employees about an equal pay analysis to elicit protected class status must inform the employees. I don't think we've ever
No, we've-
surveyed our employees.
We've never done that, but John did send me a PowerPoint, and it talks about what the equal pay analysis is and the steps that have to be done, and it's really involved. It's actually above my ability, so I would think that this would be again the type of thing that LGPI did do and does do, is to do this equal pay analysis, because there's several steps. There's determine the scope, who's the employer, who's the employee, examine existing pay policies, evaluate the existing workforce, evaluate job group or classification. So that's kind of what was all done years
So
ago.
does Bully pay for all of this stuff to
No.
take place?
No, that's
I already
the
knew
deal.
the answer.
Now it would be on us.
Oh, of
So,
course.
Anyway, but it kind of, this PowerPoint that John sent me kind of gives the steps that are to be taken for that equal pay analysis. It's pretty involved.
And again, I think what Julie's described is our current practices. We're at least have a head start on a lot of this. So I don't think this is going to represent a real big sea change for the county, but it'll help us fine tune what our existing practices are. And then lastly, there's a required notice to be posted, and BOLI will they shall make available templates. And then employers shall display the poster in every establishment. So really, it sounds like the board does agree. We'd like to get it very clear. Now, I do believe that if we can say that, yeah, being in a different bargaining unit, but my hunch is these rules would still apply to all employees within the same bargaining unit. you know, so, you know, each bargaining unit would make its own little universe of examination for equal pay. But
Commissioner Huxley?
that's really all I had, yes.
Are there any minimum number of employees? In other words, a threshold, if you have less than X number, you are exempt from this, or is it from anyone, even a sole proprietor with one employee?
Louise has read for that,
Not
and
gonna
she
get rid
said
of it anymore.
she said the number is 2. That
Where is that?
I did not
Okay.
check for
And-
that.
And another question, does
So
it-
I
are there-
guess what Louise is
are there
saying,
any
would
types-
that say there is no minimum? Go ahead.
Are there any
Commissioner Sherman.
types of professional individuals or classes like lawyers or, you know, that would be exempt, or other professionals, dentists, doctors, we could go on, you know,
Here's
that would be exempt.
well,
Nobody's exempt.
Here's what it says who an employee is. An employee is an individual other than a partner or an independent contractor, or as a participant in a work training program. So
What page is that on?
this is in your packet. I can't,
Page 5.
page
Okay,
5 of the
5 and
packet, but
21.
it's the definition section of the rules that
Yeah.
talks about what an employee is. All right, so Louise has found the, on this cover sheet, and I'll see if these are in the, here it is right here. It says, to the extent there's an economic effect, it's a result of underlying legislation. Rather than all small business employers with 2 or more employees are subject to the statute and rule. That's down here, and this is in the cover page to the rules.
421.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the equal pay analysis, we can do our own, or we can contract out with someone. And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all equal pay analysis. So I think any employer can come up with their own, so long as it's reasonable. But I have a feeling there will be groups now who will specialize in conducting equal pay analyses. So we have until September 28th, I believe, to submit the rules. So after the board gets a chance, feel free to deliver to me or Administrator Schroeder your questions about these rules. Again, mine were very large as far as you know, why they use different terms in the first definitions, and maybe they could talk about that, but then also just to make sure that we're allowed to pay people differently who are in bargaining units versus those who aren't, who are doing a comparable job. And again, the analysis there is, it's not based on one of the protected reasons for the law, but I wouldn't want to jump to any conclusions when we're dealing with these
I
kind
think
of
that's
laws.
a
and
big time
regulations.
question.
Okay, very good. And again, this is all brand new, a lot to think about, so it's just to present the information to you while we have time and not in a general meeting, and so we could talk about it. But you're all welcome to submit comments to me or Mr. Schroeder afterwards. That's really all I had on this topic.
I think another big question might be is, what is the impetus for putting this law forth? Is it for the protected classes, or what?
It's, to me, I think it is by its definitions, it's to prevent discrimination and discrimination in pay. And it used to be, the big change is it went from you can't pay men differently than women, but now they are saying that we're just going to say you can't discriminate in pay based on a protected status or protected class. So, and they've broadened the definition for that, and that definition encompasses a lot of different individuals. So, okay, thanks to the commission. That's really all I had, and I don't have anything else for the workshop. We will ask them the questions that you talked about, but we have until the 28th to provide some more. So,
Okay, one more thing before we close this meeting off. Commissioner Boyce wanted to talk about the fire for quickly, how many minutes?
Well, it's just every bit important as the 40 minutes we just spent, but yes, I will make it quick. Thank you, Commissioner Gold. Good news, bad news. The fire only grew 500 acres last night. The average since the very beginning on July 15th has been about 1,800 acres. I made a comment a little over a month ago that I was more concerned about Gold Beach than it was Agnes, but they actually have the west border of that fire essentially 90% blocked with good fire lines, and the Agnes, kind of the northwest portion, would be about 80%. Good news, bad news, the National Guard is leaving tomorrow. It's good news in that the risk is absolutely improving. We're at 100, and the bad news is that if it does flare up for Checo effect or east wind, that could be a factor, but this red team is just absolutely incredible, and some of those people have agreed, despite the most of them are from the south and Hurricane Florence, they are going to stay about another 5 or 6 days, and I think that's really good news. The fire's 135,000 acres. It's about 64 million to date, and the weather is favorable. They've tried to do some burns the last couple of days that would not take because the humidity is so high. So that's also good news, bad news. But if that humidity remains, if the weather, 20% chance of rain today and tomorrow, but of course don't hold your breath. But we just need to get through the next 2 or 3 weeks and hope and pray we don't have an east wind, and I think it's going to stay under 150,000 acres compared to the Checo Bar, which, as you know, is about 191,000 acres. So big hit for Curry County, not to mention the Lobster Creek fire. One more side note, we're still at 1,100 firefighters. We have lost some of our hotshot crews, a couple, and a little bit of our aviation, but that's been an issue anyway, trying to get them up in the visibility conditions that they've had to deal with. So that's all I have, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This meeting is closed off. Okay. 11:32.